Alright everyone, we start off today with a very interesting article here. Link in the description, archived of course, is to a Substack by Seymourhersh actually. You may have heard that name before if you know anything about the history of journalism in the United States. Hersh was the one that broke the My Lai massacre way back during the Vietnam War. He's also covered a bunch of other stuff. Some of it's been corroborated, some of it's called conspiracy theories. You'll note that the newer it is, the more likely journalism is likely to be called a conspiracy theory. There's a reason for that, because if you disclose something 50 years later, normally it doesn't matter. Just look at the Gulf of Tonkin incident. All the people that talked about how that was a false flag were considered conspiracy theorists till a few years ago. Now we know that all of those conspiracy theories basically were true. So when Seymourhersh comes out and makes the claim that the CIA did the Nordstream bombing, well, he's relying upon an anonymous source, so someone familiar with the matter, and we do have to be careful, therefore, in trusting it, regardless of the plausibility of the scenario. I would like to point out that people preemptively calling it a conspiracy theory, that would never happen. You don't know that. You do have a claim that this explains what occurred. That's even based on an anonymous source, at the very least, better than not knowing at all, because I've seen similar claims without evidence that the Russians bombed their own pipeline, and a lot of you bought it hook, line, and sinker. I recall at the time in my own analysis saying that that probably was horseshit, because it didn't really make sense. If you have a pipeline that's feeding a significant proportion of your potential enemy's energy, why, when you can use it for leverage because you can turn it off at any time you want to on your end via Gazprom, why would you bomb it and then remove that bit of leverage unless you intend to go insane? Well, in the wake of that, Russia hasn't gone insane. It's basically acting the same way that it has been the whole time. So I call shenanigans on the Russians being the ones that did it. There's no evidence of it. That claim was made right up front like a goddamn legacy media tidal wave, and there wasn't even an anonymous source there. There was just speculation and some hype. Then, you've got this claim. It is plausible. The United States would be near the top of the list of nations that would want to destroy Nord Stream. The other one, another big one would be the Germans or perhaps the British. It would make sense. But does that prove the point? No, it doesn't prove it. It's still just a claim. A plausible one that fits the evidence insofar as we can gather what little we have. Of course, the Germans already investigated and found no specific evidence of who done it, including the Russians again at the time. The legacy media didn't cover that one as much as the initial story when it blew up in the first place. The basic claim that Seymourhersh is making is that according to the source, the United States had already planted remote explosives on the pipeline sometime prior to it being blown. They did this under the cover of the Baltic Ops. That was a war game that occurred, of course, a few months beforehand. And the idea was that the war games, well, it probably wasn't all meant as a cover. It is a legit military exercise for training. They said, well, as long as we're in that area, Nord Stream's right below it, we can have one of those ships put down a couple of divers, cover it as a training exercise. The Russians are nowhere around. They're not going to really know what the fuck is going on. Send in a dive team or send in a submersible of some sort. You plant the explosives and then later on we detonate them. Once we're out of the area, out of the blast zone, of course. Again, plausible. There's no proof of this. I will say this, though. Much like there's hypocrisy over people who believed the initial story that the U.S. put out, re Nord Stream, and then ignore things counter to that, just because you presume that the original story was false, and trust me, I do, does not necessarily mean that this particular claim is the actual smoking gun. Again, you only have one source. Hersh is generally a respected journalist, has been wrong before, and is called a conspiracy theorist, again, mainly related to things that are new, which is not a coincidence, but overall has been respected. Hell, he worked with the legacy media for the most part there. He was working for the New York Times, I think back in the 1980s. So shouldn't the legacy media take him seriously? Oh no, he's got a Substack now, so he went rogue, so we don't need to discuss this evil conspiracy theory. That's what I speculate will happen. The White House immediately came out, in the CIA too, and said this is horseshit. None of this is true. It would never happen. Well, that's just your opinion, man. Yeah, they're going to do it. They're going to admit that they got caught bombing the Nord Stream pipeline, theoretically an act of war against the Russians. If the United States or any NATO country was involved, they're not going to admit to it. You're going to cover it up, possibly with a military training exercise, muddy the waters a little bit. Nobody's going to find evidence of it. How the hell are they supposed to find evidence of who put an explosive on the side of the pipeline? They're never going to be able to do so. So whatever party is guilty has that cover. That would be true even if it had been the Russians. Putin just went stark raving mad one day and ordered the pipeline to be destroyed. Because for reasons, unknown reasons. He wanted to cut off his nose to spite his face. Just to show that that he's the strong man of Eastern Europe or some shit like that. Yeah, never made much sense to me. I do like the conspiracy theory angle of this, though. I like it when something is dismissed out of hand. They're shooting the messenger first by saying, well, Seymourhersh has done other conspiracy theory stuff, like he claimed that the Osama raid didn't go as it was officially listed. Well, I've never seen a picture of Osama's mangled corpse now, have you? He was also one of the people that broke the Abu Ghraib story back during the Iraq War era. You remember that one? The torture scandal at Abu Ghraib that blew up in the nation's face and crippled the W administration? Yeah, that was Seymourhersh too. That was corroborated. That became one of the greatest national scandals. It's probably second only to the My Lai massacre in his corpus of work. There are other claims, something involving JFK and other things that he's done throughout time. Again, the big problem is that when you work with an anonymous source, even if you know the source to be credible, the public can't necessarily gather that. But dismissing it out of hand when there is no specific countervailing evidence, and there's not, is also equally inappropriate. I remain with an open mind to everything other than the claim that Putin was just having a bad day and that he was the one that ordered the Nord Stream pipeline to be destroyed. I think there's a very low probability of that having happened. The CIA and USA, it's possible, but this doesn't prove that. We still also have to keep an open mind towards the possibility that the Germans who immediately investigated it did it themselves. It could have been the Swedes. It could easily have been the British. It's well within their technological capabilities. And it could have been Ukrainians or people loyal to them, people partnered with them. It would be really funny if it were actually eco-terrorists or something like that. I find out Greenpeace bombed the Nord Stream pipeline or something like that. Wouldn't that be... Seymourhersh would be wishing he was the one that broke that story if that were true. I don't think so. I think this and a few other explanations sort of compete with having some degree of evidence behind them. It's interesting that the mainline narrative never did, though. Yet this is the conspiracy theory. So I don't know that the CIA blew up Nord Stream, but it's an intriguing theory, and from a source that is generally reliable, although the original source that he's deriving it from really is in the same category as an unnamed official says. Within an administration or something. You're never quite sure whether it's true. Then you just have to default to looking at the plausibility of the narrative that story tells. I would rate this as highly plausible. That's about all. Peace out.